Dr. Elena Marsh adjusted the rearview mirror of her weathered Honda Civic as she pulled into the parking lot of the Millbrook County Courthouse. At 38, she had learned to blend into academic conferences and research symposiums, the kind of woman whose credentials spoke louder than her understated presence. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature silver from years of late-night laboratory work, was pulled back in a practical bun, and her clothes, faded jeans, worn hiking boots, and a forest green sweater that had seen countless field expeditions, spoke of someone who worked with living systems, rather than theoretical models. The courthouse before her was nothing like the sterile university buildings she'd grown accustomed to over the past 15 years. Built in 1847, the red brick structure with its imposing clock tower attracted a very specific clientele during bankruptcy auctions: property developers, antique dealers, and opportunistic investors who needed to maintain their edge in a competitive market. The building itself showed its age in the worn stone steps and windows that had witnessed generations of legal proceedings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena sat in her car for a moment, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the courthouse lawn, and she could see expensive vehicles, Range Rovers, modified pickup trucks, and sleek sedans that screamed real estate money. Her own car, with its dented bumper and university parking permits covering half the rear window, looked woefully out of place. She reached for the worn leather messenger bag on the passenger seat, the weight of it familiar in her hands. Inside were the remnants of her research funding, $3,000 scraped together from teaching stipends and consulting fees, intended to purchase surplus laboratory equipment from the university's bankruptcy sale. The Environmental Sciences Department at Millbrook University was hemorrhaging money, and everything from microscopes to soil analysis kits would be auctioned to the highest bidder. The registration area inside was bustling with activity. A young clerk whose nameplate read Jennifer couldn't have been more than 25, with perfectly applied makeup and manicured nails that seemed oddly out of place in the dusty, bureaucratic environment. When Elena approached, Jennifer looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "Mom, are you sure you're in the right place?" Jennifer asked, her voice carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for people who didn't fit the expected mold. "Most of our bidders today are here for the commercial properties and heavy equipment." Eleanor set her registration paperwork on the scarred wooden counter with deliberate care. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said quietly, sliding her bidder confirmation across the desk. The document bore the official seal of the court and several signatures that would have made Jennifer's eyes widen if she'd known how to read the academic credentials properly. Jennifer scanned the paperwork with growing confusion. The authorization was legitimate, but this woman didn't look like the typical property speculator who frequented their auctions. Most of them arrived wearing expensive suits and carrying equipment that cost more than her annual salary. "Bidder number 47, Jennifer said, finally handing over a paddle and access badge. "Just please be careful with the numbering system. Some of our regulars get particular about protocol." Elena nodded and made her way past the clusters of serious-faced men examining property surveys and financial documents. The main auction room was a testament to faded grandeur, with high ceilings, ornate molding, and rows of wooden chairs that had hosted decades of legal proceedings. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in an unflattering institutional glow. The auctioneer, a thin man with nervous energy and a voice trained for projection, worked through the morning's inventory with practiced efficiency. Laboratory equipment went quickly, too quickly and too expensively for Elena's modest budget. She watched helplessly as centrifuges and spectrophotometers sold for prices that would have funded her research for months. It was approaching noon when the auctioneer's demeanor shifted. His confident patter faltered as he consulted his notes, and Elena noticed several bidders suddenly finding excuses to leave. Coffee breaks, phone calls, urgent consultations in the hallway. The energy in the room changed, as if someone had opened a window to let in a cold draft. "Next item," the auctioneer announced, his voice lacking its usual enthusiasm, "is a 12-acre woodland parcel known locally as, Blackthorn Grove. Property has been abandoned for tax purposes. No structures, no utilities, no road access beyond an old logging trail." Elena looked up from her budget calculations, suddenly interested. 12 acres of undeveloped woodland could contain botanical specimens that might salvage her research. She'd spent years studying old-growth forest ecosystems, and abandoned properties often harbored rare plant species that had been protected by neglect. "Bidding starts at $5, the auctioneer continued, and Elena noticed something peculiar in his tone. He wasn't trying to generate enthusiasm. If anything, he seemed to be hoping no one would bid at all. She raised her paddle. $5. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Every remaining person in the room turned to stare at her, not with envy or competition, but with something that made her skin crawl. Pity, as if she'd just volunteered for a particularly unpleasant form of suicide. "Going once," the auctioneer called, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena looked around, expecting someone, anyone, to challenge her bid. 12 acres of woodland for $5 was absurd, even if the property needed work. But the other bidders were actively avoiding eye contact, studying their phones, or suddenly discovering urgent business elsewhere in the building. "Do I hear $6? The auctioneer asked without conviction. Silence. $3, Elena called out impulsively, misunderstanding the protocol but sensing an opportunity. The auctioneer blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, you can't bid lower than your own." "I'll accept $3, he said quickly, as if eager to end the proceedings. "Going once, going twice." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo louder than it should have. "Sold to bidder number 47 for $3. The room began to empty immediately, faster than normal, as if people couldn't leave quickly enough. But as Elena approached the clerk's table to complete her purchase, she caught fragments of hushed conversations drifting on the spring air filtering through the courthouse. "Windows," should have warned. "Heard that nobody's been in there for 15 years. What happened to the last family who tried to clear it?" The auctioneer handed her the deed with hands that trembled slightly, avoiding eye contact. When Elena asked about property surveys or utility access, the man simply shook his head and walked away without another word. That's when Elena noticed the most unsettling detail of all. An elderly woman had been sitting in the back row throughout the entire auction, but Elena had somehow failed to notice her until now. She was thin and weather-beaten, with sharp eyes that seemed to see more than they should, and she was staring directly at Elena with an expression of profound concern. The woman approached slowly, her movements careful but determined. "You don't want that place, dear," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trust me on this." "Why not?" Elena asked, genuine curiosity overcoming her usual politeness. "It's just woodland. Perfect for botanical research." The elderly woman's eyes widened at the word research. "Research?" She glanced around the now nearly empty room, then leaned closer. "Listen carefully. That grove, it's been in the same family for generations. Protected, guarded. The tax seizure was a mistake. A clerical error that should never have happened." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the courthouse's ancient heating system. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that gets people hurt," the woman replied. "Or worse. Stay away after dark, and whatever you do, don't disturb the center grove where the old oak stands. Some things are better left alone." Before Elena could ask what she meant, the woman walked away with surprising speed for someone her age, leaving Elena standing alone in the empty courthouse with a deed to 12 acres of apparently cursed woodland and more questions than answers. As she drove home through the winding country roads of Millbrook County, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple property purchase. The deed in her glove compartment felt heavier than $3 worth of woodland should, and every mile brought her closer to a decision point she didn't fully understand. But Elena Marsh had spent her entire career investigating natural phenomena that others dismissed as impossible or irrelevant. If there was something unusual about Blackthorn Grove, she intended to discover it through careful observation and scientific methodology. Whatever local superstitions surrounded the property, she was confident that rational inquiry would provide rational explanations. The question was whether she was prepared for explanations that challenged the very foundations of what she considered rational. Elena's Toyota Highlander bounced along the rutted logging trail that served as the only access to Blackthorn Grove, her scientific equipment rattling in the cargo area with each jarring impact. The trail wound through dense second-growth forest for nearly 2 miles before opening into what the county records optimistically called a woodland parcel. What Elena saw took her breath away. Ancient oaks rose before her like cathedral pillars, their massive trunks easily 6 feet in diameter, and their canopy so dense it filtered the morning sunlight into a green-gold twilight. These weren't the typical New England hardwoods she'd studied for years. These trees were old, older than anything that should exist in a region that had been logged repeatedly over the past 3 centuries. She parked at what appeared to be a natural clearing and began unloading her equipment. Soil analysis kit, digital calipers, GPS unit, pH meters, and a tablet loaded with botanical identification software. Her initial plan was straightforward: catalog the species, map the ecosystem, and document anything unusual for potential publication. The GPS unit immediately began displaying error messages. No satellite signal, despite the clear sky visible through gaps in the canopy. Elena frowned and tried her cell phone. No service. Both devices had worked perfectly during the drive up the logging trail, but now showed nothing but static or searching for signal indicators. Interesting, she murmured, making her first note in a field journal. Possible electromagnetic interference from unknown source. She moved deeper into the grove, her trained eye immediately cataloging details that made no sense. The trees were arranged in rough concentric circles, with the largest specimens forming an outer ring and progressively smaller trees creating an inner spiral that led toward the grove's center. No natural forest exhibited such geometric organization. The root systems were equally impossible. Instead of the typical shallow spread of oak roots, these trees showed evidence of deep taproots that created raised ridges in the forest floor, ridges that followed the same spiral pattern as the trees themselves. Elena had never seen anything like it in 15 years of forest ecology research. Her electronic equipment continued to malfunction as she approached the grove's heart. The digital calipers reset themselves repeatedly. The pH meters gave readings that fluctuated wildly from acidic to alkaline within seconds, and her tablet's GPS app showed her location as approximately 400 miles offshore in the Atlantic Ocean. Definitely some kind of interference, Elena noted, switching to mechanical instruments and paper records. Source unknown, but effect increases with proximity to center of grove. That's when she heard the whispers. At first, Elena dismissed the sounds as wind through the leaves, but the air was perfectly still. The whispers seemed to come from the trees themselves. Not words in any language she recognized, but something that bypassed rational understanding and spoke directly to some deeper part of her consciousness. The sound raised goosebumps on her arms and triggered an instinctive desire to leave immediately. Instead, she pressed forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her growing unease. The grove's center was dominated by a single oak of impossible size. Elena estimated its age at over 1,000 years, which should have been impossible for any tree in North America. Its trunk was easily 10 feet in diameter, and its root system created a natural amphitheater of raised earth that seemed almost deliberately designed for something. Elena was taking measurements of the great tree's circumference when she realized she was no longer alone. "You need to leave now," the voice came from directly behind her, calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. Elena spun around to find a man watching her from the edge of the root circle. He was perhaps 35 years old, tall and lean, with the kind of build that suggested outdoor work rather than gym membership. His dark hair was touched with premature grey, and his clothes, worn jeans, hiking boots, and a canvas jacket, marked him as someone comfortable in wilderness settings, but it was his eyes that made Elena take a step backward. They were the deep green of old forests, and they held a knowledge that seemed far older than his apparent age. "I'm sorry," Elena said, recovering her composure, "but you're the one who's trespassing. I own this property." The man's expression shifted from wariness to something approaching alarm. "You're the one who bought it at auction, Elena Marsh, and you are someone who's been protecting this place longer than you've been alive." He stepped forward, and Elena noticed that his movements made no sound on the leaf-strewn ground. "You have no idea what you've walked into." A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, crying out in what sounded almost like distress. The man glanced up at it and nodded, as if receiving some kind of message. "Look," Elena said, trying to inject some academic authority into her voice. "I understand there might be local folklore about this grove, but I'm a scientist. I'm here to study the ecosystem, not disturb anything historical or cultural. This isn't folklore." The man's voice carried a weight that made Elena reconsider her dismissive tone. "My name is Rowan Blackthorne. My family has been the guardian of this grove for 43 generations." Elena felt a chill of recognition. "Blackthorne? As in Blackthorne Grove? As in the family that held the original land grant, before your government decided property taxes were more important than ancient responsibilities?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "The county had no right to sell what was never truly abandoned. According to the deed, the property taxes hadn't been paid in over 15 years. According to the deed, this land belongs to whoever has the most recent paperwork. But some things run deeper than legal documents." Rowan gestured toward the massive oak tree. "This grove has been protected for over 1,000 years, not as a curiosity or a research site, but because what it guards must never be disturbed." Elena found herself looking more carefully at Rowan Blackthorne. Despite his relatively young appearance, he spoke with the authority of someone who had spent decades, perhaps a lifetime, learning secrets that weren't written in any textbook. His hands were calloused from outdoor work, but they also bore small scars in geometric patterns that looked almost ritualistic. "What exactly are you protecting?" Elena asked. The question seemed to pain him. "Something that your scientific instruments can't measure and your rational mind won't accept." He gestured toward her equipment. "How's your technology working near the center oak?" Elena glanced at her malfunctioning devices and felt a flush of embarrassment. "There's some kind of electromagnetic interference, probably mineral deposits in the soil, or unusual atmospheric conditions, or," Rowan said quietly, "something that doesn't want to be measured." The hawk overhead cried out again, more urgently this time. Rowan looked up and his expression darkened. "We're not alone anymore," he said. "Your presence here, it's attracted attention. The kind of attention that has been waiting 15 years for someone to legally claim this property." Elena felt a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with local superstition. "What kind of attention?" But before Rowan could answer, the sound of vehicles approaching along the logging trail echoed through the grove. Multiple vehicles moving fast, and they didn't sound like the kind of cars that belonged to curious hikers or local officials. "Too late," Rowan muttered. He looked directly at Elena with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "Dr. Marsh, you have two choices. You can leave now and pretend this never happened, or you can stay and learn why some things should never be bought at any price." Elena looked at the ancient oak, at her malfunctioning equipment, at the man who claimed to be the hereditary guardian of secrets older than recorded history. Then she looked toward the sound of approaching vehicles and realized that whatever was coming probably wasn't interested in her scientific research. "I'm staying," she said. Rowan's expression was unreadable. "Then God help us both." Elena spent a restless night in her car at a campground 20 miles from Blackthorn Grove, but by dawn, her scientific curiosity had overwhelmed her caution. She returned to the Grove with a full camping setup, determined to conduct a proper multi-day survey. Despite Rowan Blackthorn's warnings, the vehicles from the previous day were gone, leaving no trace except fresh tire tracks in the soft earth of the logging trail. But Elena noticed that her equipment malfunctioned even more severely on her second visit, as if the Grove itself was becoming increasingly resistant to electronic intrusion. She was setting up her tent at the edge of the clearing when Rowan appeared again, emerging from the forest with the silent grace she was beginning to associate with him. "You came back," he observed, neither surprised nor pleased. "I'm a researcher," Elena replied, driving a tent stake into the soft forest floor. "Running away from unusual phenomena isn't in my job description. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot, even phenomena that could get you killed." Elena paused in her work. "Are you threatening me? I'm trying to save you." Rowan's voice carried a weariness that seemed far older than his years. "But I'm beginning to realize that might not be possible." As if summoned by his words, the whispers began again. Elena had almost convinced herself that yesterday's strange voices were wind or imagination, but now they were unmistakably present. Dozens of voices speaking in harmonized tones that seemed to come from the trees themselves. "What is that?" Elena asked, her scientific skepticism warring with growing unease. "The Grove is trying to communicate," Rowan said simply. "It knows you're here and it knows others are coming. Trees don't communicate through vocal, Dr. Marsh." The interruption came from a new voice, elderly and female. Elena turned to see an old woman emerging from what appeared to be a small cottage, tucked between 2 massive oaks. Elena was certain the structure hadn't been there yesterday, yet it looked as if it had stood among the trees for decades. The woman was perhaps 78 years old, small and wiry, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that held the same impossible depth as Rowan's. She wore practical clothes, wool sweater, canvas pants, sturdy boots, but moved with a grace that suggested hidden strength. "Grandmother," Rowan said, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure you'd show yourself." "The situation has moved beyond subtlety," the elderly woman replied. She studied Elena with an intensity that made the scientist feel like a specimen under examination. "I am Vera Blackthorn. I've been guardian of this grove for 57 years, and I've been expecting someone like you for far longer than that." Elena found her voice. "Someone like me?" "Someone who bridges worlds," Vera said enigmatically. "Someone who speaks both the language of measurement and the language of mystery." She gestured toward Elena's malfunctioning equipment. "Your instruments fail here because they're trying to quantify something that exists partially outside the normal flow of space and time." "That's not scientifically possible," Elena protested. But even as she spoke, she was watching Vera's cottage. The structure seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at it, as if it couldn't quite decide whether to be completely real. "Let me show you what your science cannot explain," Vera said. She approached the great oak at the grove's center and placed her weathered hand against its bark. The tree responded immediately. Light pulsed along its trunk, not reflected sunlight, but a soft bioluminescence that traveled up from the roots to the highest branches. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and Elena could swear she heard something that sounded almost like singing. "The mother tree," Vera explained, her hand still pressed against the glowing bark, "was planted over 1,000 years ago by Druids fleeing the Roman conquest of Britain. But it wasn't planted to grow normally. It was planted to seal something. Elena's scientific training demanded skepticism, but she couldn't deny what she was seeing. The tree was responding to Vera's touch in ways that violated everything she understood about plant physiology. Seal what? Elena asked. A doorway, Rowan answered. A thin place between dimensions where something hungry and malevolent has been trying to break through for centuries. The original Druids gave their lives to create a living seal, using the oak as an anchor point between our world and elsewhere. As if responding to his words, the air near the mother tree began to shimmer like heat haze, though the day was cool. Elena could see distortions in the space around the massive trunk, areas where the light bent wrong and shadows fell at impossible angles. This is what we've protected for 43 generations, Vera continued. Not just a tree, but the barrier that keeps things that should not exist in our world from crossing over. Elena's rational mind raced through possible explanations. Optical illusions, gas emissions, electromagnetic phenomena, but none of them accounted for what she was witnessing. Why are you showing me this? Because the seal is weakening, Vera said, removing her hand from the tree. The bioluminescence faded, but the distortions in the air remained. Yesterday's visitors brought equipment that interferes with the dimensional barriers. Every electronic device that activates near the mother tree causes damage we cannot repair alone. What visitors? Rowan and Vera exchanged glances. Corporate scouts, Rowan said. People who work for someone with enough money to buy information about unusual property purchases, and enough resources to act on that information. Quickly, Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the forest air. Someone's been watching the grove? Someone's been waiting for the grove to become legally available, Vera corrected. For 15 years, we've been squatting on land we couldn't legally defend, hoping the tax seizure would never happen. Now that it has, and now that someone owns the property, they can exploit it legally, Elena finished. Understanding beginning to dawn. A new sound interrupted their conversation, the high, keening cry of a young person in distress. Elena looked around, trying to locate the source, when a girl of perhaps 16 crashed through the underbrush at a dead run. She was small and quick, with short auburn hair and clothes that suggested she was completely at home in wilderness settings. But her face was pale with terror, and she was gasping for breath as if she'd been running for miles. Sage! Rowan caught the girl as she stumbled into the clearing. What's wrong? They're back, Sage gasped. The ones with the machines. But this time they brought more equipment. Big trucks, drilling equipment, and something else. She looked at Elena with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her apparent years. Something that makes the animals scream. Elena felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together. Her $3 property purchase had triggered events that had been building for years, possibly decades. The grove wasn't just an unusual ecosystem. It was the site of something that powerful people wanted to control. Regardless of the consequences, Dr. Marsh, Vera said, her voice taking on a formal tone that suggested the conversation was moving toward some kind of ultimatum. You now face a choice that will determine not just your fate, but potentially the fate of everyone in a 100-mile radius. You can leave now, sell the property to whoever offers the most money, and forget everything you've seen here. Elena looked at the shimmering air around the mother tree, at Rowan's protective stance, at Sage's terrified face, at Vera's eyes that held the weight of decades of impossible responsibility. Or, Elena asked, or you can help us save the world from something that should never be allowed to exist in it. The whispers from the trees grew louder, more urgent, as if the grove itself was pleading for her answer. Elena realized that her simple botanical research trip had become something far more significant and far more dangerous than anything she'd ever imagined, but she also realized that walking away was no longer an option, not when she finally understood what was at stake. 200 miles away, in a glass tower overlooking Boston Harbor, Marcus Sterling received the phone call he'd been waiting 15 years to get. The 43-year-old CEO of Nexus Energy Corporation stood at his corner office window, watching cargo ships navigate the harbor while his assistant briefed him on the Millbrook County auction results. "The property sold for $3, the voice on the speakerphone reported. "Buyer is Dr. Elena Marsh, environmental scientist at Millbrook University. No known connections to corporate interests or government agencies." Sterling's reflection in the window showed a man who'd built his fortune by recognizing opportunities others missed. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suit custom-tailored, and his pale blue eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone who viewed the world as a collection of resources waiting to be exploited. At Nexus Energy, he'd pioneered controversial fracking techniques, deep-sea mining operations, and experimental geothermal projects that traditional energy companies considered too risky. But the Blackthorn Grove represented something far more valuable than oil or natural gas. "Interesting," Sterling murmured, turning from the window to face the array of monitors that dominated one wall of his office. Each screen displayed different data streams: satellite imagery, geological surveys, electromagnetic readings, and classified government reports that had cost him millions to acquire. A university researcher, that might actually work in our favor. Sterling had first learned about the Grove's unusual properties through his network of former military contacts. Nexus Energy maintained relationships with dozens of retired intelligence officers, defense contractors, and Pentagon officials who fed him information about projects that might have commercial applications. The Grove had appeared in classified files as early as 2008, when satellite surveillance detected energy anomalies that didn't match any known geological phenomena. "Sir?" his assistant prompted. "Activate the Blackthorn Protocol," Sterling instructed. "I want a full surveillance package operational within 24 hours. Electromagnetic monitoring, thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar. And send Dr. Kettlewell." Sterling walked to his private safe and withdrew a thick file labeled Dimensional Energy Research, Classified. Inside were 15 years of accumulated data, satellite photos showing impossible electromagnetic signatures, geological surveys that detected cavities where none should exist, and theoretical papers from physicists who'd been quietly recruited to study what Sterling's people had dubbed reality distortions. The Grove wasn't just unusual. According to his research, it was a naturally occurring phenomenon that could revolutionize energy production. If his theories were correct, the site contained a stable portal to parallel dimensions with different physical laws that could provide unlimited energy to anyone who learned to harness them. Sterling had spent over $50 million preparing for this opportunity. His research division had developed experimental equipment designed to detect and manipulate dimensional boundaries. His legal team had spent years researching property laws related to the Grove, waiting for the moment when it might become available for purchase. But Elena Marsh had bought it for $3 before Sterling's people could act. "No matter," Sterling said to himself. "Dr. Marsh is about to receive an offer she can't refuse." Meanwhile, Dr. James Kettlewell was preparing for the most important and potentially most dangerous assignment of his career. The 41-year-old theoretical physicist had been working for Nexus Energy's research division for 18 months, drawn by Sterling's promises of unlimited funding for projects that traditional institutions considered impossible. Kettlewell's daughter, Lucy, was dying of leukemia. The experimental treatments that might save her cost over $1 million, money that his university salary could never provide. When Sterling offered him a position that paid 5 times his academic income, Kettlewell had signed without reading the fine print. Now he was driving toward Millbrook County with a cargo van full of equipment that violated several international treaties on dimensional research. In the passenger seat sat a briefcase containing detection devices that could measure electromagnetic fields with precision that bordered on the supernatural. The van's cargo area held drilling equipment, ground-penetrating radar, and something Sterling called a dimensional interface module, a device that Kettlewell only partially understood and completely feared. His instructions were simple: confirm the dimensional anomalies, establish baseline measurements, and prepare the site for Sterling's arrival. What worried Kettlewell was what Sterling planned to do after that. Elena was helping Sage gather herbs for what Vera called protective preparations when she heard vehicles approaching along the logging trail. The sound was different from the previous day, heavier, more mechanical, suggesting equipment rather than simple surveillance. "They're back," Sage whispered, her face pale. "And they brought more machines." Rowan emerged from the forest at a run, his expression grim. "3 vehicles. One's a cargo van loaded with electronic equipment. The others look like security." Elena felt her stomach clench. Her simple botanical research had triggered something far beyond her understanding, and now armed men were approaching the grove with unknown intentions. "Dr. Marsh," a voice called from the edge of the clearing. A man in his early 40s stepped into view, wearing khakis, a polo shirt, and expensive hiking boots that suggested he was trying to look academic rather than threatening. "My name is Dr. James Kettlewell. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss." Elena recognized the name immediately. James Kettlewell from MIT. Formerly MIT, currently working in the private sector. Kettlewell's smile seemed forced, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as Elena. "I was hoping we could talk about your recent property acquisition." "How did you know?" "Public records," Kettlewell interrupted. "Property sales are a matter of public record, and my employer has been interested in this particular parcel for some time." Rowan stepped protectively between Elena and Kettlewell, his hand resting on what Elena now realized was a hunting knife at his belt. "Your employer being?" "Nexus Energy Corporation. We specialize in alternative energy sources." Elena felt a chill of recognition. Nexus Energy had a reputation in environmental circles as one of the most ruthlessly exploitative corporations in the energy sector. Their fracking operations had contaminated groundwater across 3 states, and their deep-sea mining projects had destroyed marine ecosystems throughout the Pacific. "What does an energy company want with a grove of old oak trees?" Elena asked. Kettlewell's expression grew uncomfortable. "Dr. Marsh, we have reason to believe this property contains unusual geological formations. Formations that might have significant commercial applications." "What kind of formations?" Instead of answering directly, Kettlewell gestured toward the van parked at the trail's edge. "Would you mind if I took some basic measurements?" "Just standard geological survey work." "I would mind," Rowan said firmly. "This is private property and you're trespassing." "Actually," Kettlewell replied, pulling out what appeared to be an official document, "my employer has filed for mineral rights assessment under the Federal Energy Development Act. We have legal authority to conduct preliminary surveys on any property where we've detected energy anomalies." Elena snatched the document and scanned it quickly. The legal language was dense and deliberately obscure, but it appeared to give Nexus Energy the right to conduct non-invasive energy assessment on her property. "This is impossible," Elena protested. "I just bought this land yesterday. My employer has been monitoring energy signatures from this location for over a decade," Kettlewell explained. "The paperwork was prepared years ago, contingent on the property becoming privately owned." Vera emerged from her cottage, moving with surprising speed for her age. She took one look at Kettlewell and his equipment, and her face went white. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made even Kettlewell step backward. "Mom, I'm simply conducting scientific measurements." "Those aren't scientific instruments," Vera interrupted, pointing at the equipment visible in Kettlewell's van. "Those are devices designed to manipulate dimensional boundaries. I can feel them from here, creating distortions in the natural order." Kettlewell's forced smile faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. But Elena was watching the grove around them, and she could see that Vera was right. The trees seemed agitated, their leaves rustling despite the absence of wind. The whispers she'd heard earlier were returning, more urgent and distressed than before. Most disturbing of all, the air around the mother tree was beginning to shimmer again, but differently than when Vera had touched it. Instead of the controlled bioluminescence she'd witnessed earlier, chaotic patterns of light were flickering through the bark, as if the tree was experiencing some form of distress. Your equipment is interfering with something, Elena said, her scientific training overriding her fear. Whatever energy patterns exist here, your devices are disrupting them. Kettlewell pulled out a handheld detector and activated it. Immediately, the device began emitting high-pitched electronic sounds that seemed to cause physical pain to both Rowan and Sage. The girl clutched her head and stumbled, while Rowan's face twisted in agony. The mother tree's distress signals became visible, sending pulses of erratic light up its trunk. Worse, the shimmering distortions around its base began to expand, creating areas where Elena could see through the air itself to glimpses of somewhere else, a place of shadows and writhing movement that made her stomach lurch with instinctive terror. "Turn it off!" Elena shouted, but Kettlewell was staring at his readings in fascination. "Incredible," he breathed. "The dimensional variance readings are off the charts." Sterling was right. This is a stable portal to parallel space. "Turn it off!" Vera commanded, her voice carrying a power that seemed to come from the grove itself, but it was too late. The expanding distortions had reached a critical threshold, and something was beginning to push through from the other side. Elena caught glimpses of shapes that hurt to look at directly, angular forms that seemed to exist in too many dimensions simultaneously, moving with predatory intelligence toward the weakening barrier. Rowan grabbed Kettlewell's detector and smashed it against a tree, silencing its electronic shrieking. The distortions around the mother tree stabilized, but didn't disappear entirely, leaving visible gaps in reality that pulsed with malevolent hunger. "You have to leave," Vera said, her voice shaking with exhaustion. "All of you. The damage you've done, it will take days to repair, and every hour the breach remains open brings them closer to breaking through permanently." Kettlewell stared at the impossible sight before him, his academic skepticism warring with undeniable evidence. "What are those things?" "Things that should never exist in our world," Rowan replied grimly. "Things that will destroy everything you've ever loved if they cross over completely." Elena looked at her former colleague, seeing him clearly for the first time. "James, your daughter, Lucy, how is she?" Kettlewell's composure cracked. "She's dying. The treatments, they cost more money than I could ever make in academia. Sterling promised to fund everything if I just conducted this one survey. And now you understand the price," Vera said quietly. "Your daughter's life in exchange for potentially ending all life on this side of reality." The shadows beyond the dimensional gaps pulsed with increasing aggression, as if sensing weakness in the barrier. Elena realized they had minutes, perhaps less, before the situation became irreversible. "James," Elena said urgently, "you have to help us seal this breach. Whatever Sterling is paying you, it won't matter if those things break through." Kettlewell looked at his van full of equipment, at the impossible scene before him, at the growing shadows that pressed against the weakening barriers between worlds. For the first time since signing with Nexus Energy, Dr. James Kettlewell began to question whether any amount of money was worth the price Sterling demanded. The dimensional breach stabilized at roughly 6 feet in diameter, but its effects rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. Elena watched in fascination and horror as reality itself seemed to develop fractures around the grove's perimeter. Trees flickered between solid matter and translucent phantoms. Shadows fell upward. The sound of her own heartbeat echoed from directions that didn't exist. "How long until it closes on its own?" Elena asked Vera, who was kneeling beside the mother tree with her hands pressed against its bark. "It won't," the elderly woman replied, her voice strained with effort. "The damage is too severe. Without active intervention, the breach will continue expanding until it engulfs everything within a 100-mile radius." Dr. Kettlewell stood frozen, beside his disabled equipment, staring at readings that violated everything he understood about physics. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Matter cannot exist in multiple states simultaneously. Dimensional boundaries are theoretical constructs." "Tell that to them," Rowan said grimly, pointing at the writhing shapes pressing against the weakened barrier. Elena could see more clearly now what existed on the other side. The parallel dimension appeared to be populated by entities that existed partially outside normal space, creatures of living shadow that moved with predatory intelligence and seemed to feed on the breakdown of natural law itself. Wherever they pressed against the barrier, the air itself began to decay, creating pockets of absolute nothingness that hurt to perceive directly. "We need to evacuate the area," Elena said, her scientific training asserting itself despite the supernatural circumstances. "If this breach continues expanding—" A piercing scream cut through the forest air. Elena spun around to see Sage running toward them from the direction of the logging trail, her face white with terror. "They're here!" Sage gasped, stumbling into the clearing. "Sterling's people, but something's wrong with them. Their eyes—" She shuddered. "Their eyes are completely black and they're moving wrong." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. "Moving wrong how?" "Like puppets," Sage replied. "Like something else is controlling them from inside." Rowan's expression darkened. "The shadow entities. They're possessing Sterling's advanced scouts." As if summoned by his words, 3 figures emerged from the forest. Eleanor recognized them as the security personnel who had accompanied Kettlewell, but their transformation was immediately apparent. Their eyes had become pools of absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, as if their bodies were being operated by something unfamiliar with human anatomy. Most disturbing of all, they were smiling with expressions of malevolent joy that had nothing human about them. "Dr. Marsh," one of the possessed men said, his voice layered with harmonics that suggested multiple entities speaking in unison. "How delightful to finally meet you properly. We've been waiting so long for someone to open the door." Elena backed toward the mother tree, her mind racing. "You're not from this dimension." "Very good," the second possessed figure replied. "We are what your guardian friends call the Shadow Collective. We were banished from your reality centuries ago, but we never stopped looking for a way back." "What do you want?" The third possessed man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What we've always wanted, to feed. Your dimension contains so much beautiful chaos waiting to be harvested. Wars, disasters, the collapse of civilizations. We find disorder." Nutritious, Kettlewell stepped protectively beside Elena, finally understanding the implications of his employer's research. "Sterling doesn't just want to harness dimensional energy, he wants to weaponize it." "Oh, Dr. Kettlewell," the first possessed figure said, turning those terrible black eyes toward him. "Your employer has no idea what he's truly unleashed. He thinks he can control us, use us as a power source for his machines. But we have very different plans for your world." Eleanor heard vehicles approaching, multiple engines moving fast along the logging trail. Through the trees, she could see flashing lights that suggested official vehicles. "Detective Connor," Sage whispered. "She must have gotten reports about the missing hikers." Elena remembered the elderly woman from the auction who had warned her about people disappearing near the grove. Now she understood that those disappearances hadn't been accidents. They had been early manifestations of the dimensional instability, probably triggered by previous attempts to survey or exploit the property. Detective Sarah Connor emerged from the forest with her weapon drawn, accompanied by 2 sheriff's deputies. Elena could see immediately that Connor was trying to process a situation that fell far outside normal police procedure. "Everybody freeze!" Connor shouted, but her voice faltered as she took in the impossible scene before her. The dimensional breach, the possessed men with their black eyes, the ancient oak tree pulsing with otherworldly light. "Detective!" Elena called out. "You need to evacuate the area immediately. This situation is beyond normal law enforcement capabilities." Connor stared at the dimensional breach, her pragmatic worldview struggling to accommodate what she was seeing. "What in hell is that thing?" "A doorway to somewhere that should stay closed," Rowan replied. "And those men aren't entirely human anymore." The possessed figures began moving toward the law enforcement officers with predatory intent. Connor raised her weapon, but Elena realized that conventional firearms would be useless against entities that existed partially outside normal reality. "Don't shoot," Elena warned. "Bullets won't stop them, but the sound might destabilize the dimensional barriers further." Sage suddenly went rigid, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that echoed strangely in the forest air. "More coming," she said in a tone that didn't sound entirely her own. "The Grove network sends warning. Sterling's main force approaches with machines that will tear the barriers completely open." Elena stared at the young woman. "Sage, what's happening to you?" "She's channeling the Grove's collective awareness," Vera explained, still maintaining her connection to the mother tree. "All living things connected to this forest can sense the dimensional disturbance. She's receiving their warnings." Sage's eyes returned to normal, but her expression remained distant and troubled. "They're 10 minutes away. Dozens of vehicles, drilling equipment, and something else. Something that makes the animals run away screaming." Kettlewell pulled out his cell phone, trying to contact Sterling's security team. "No signal. The dimensional interference is blocking all electronic communications." Eleanor realized they were trapped in an expanding zone of supernatural chaos, with no way to call for backup and no conventional means of defense against entities that operated outside the normal laws of physics. "We need to try sealing the breach manually," she said, her scientific mind grasping for solutions. "Vera, what did the original Druids do to create the seal?" "Blood sacrifice," Vera replied grimly. "They gave their lives to anchor the mother. Trees roots in both dimensions simultaneously, creating a living barrier that could adapt to supernatural threats." "There has to be another way," Elena protested. "There is," Rowan said quietly, "but it requires someone who can bridge both worlds, someone with both scientific understanding and mystical sensitivity, someone who can survive the process of becoming a dimensional anchor." Elena understood immediately what he was suggesting, and the implications terrified her. "You're talking about a permanent transformation. Whoever does it wouldn't be entirely human anymore." "But they would be alive," Vera said. "Which is more than anyone will be if those creatures break through completely." The sound of the approaching convoy grew louder, while the possessed figures continued advancing toward Detective Connor and her deputies. The dimensional breach pulsed with increasing instability, and Elena could see more shadow entities massing. On the other side, pressing against barriers that weakened with each passing moment. For the first time since purchasing the Grove, Eleanor fully understood the price of her $3 investment. She wasn't just responsible for 12 acres of woodland. She was responsible for protecting reality itself from entities that would destroy everything she'd ever loved. The question was whether she had the courage to pay the ultimate price for that protection. Marcus Sterling arrived at Blackthorn Grove like a conquering general, his convoy of 12 vehicles creating a makeshift base camp at the edge of the forest. Elena watched from her hiding position near the mother tree as Sterling's private army established a perimeter that would have impressed military commanders. The lead vehicle was an armored command post equipped with satellite communications. thermal imaging, and electromagnetic field generators designed to contain supernatural phenomena. Behind it came trucks loaded with drilling equipment, earth-moving machinery, and devices that Elena's scientific background couldn't identify, but that made the grove's trees visibly recoil. Sterling emerged from his command vehicle, wearing pristine outdoor gear, surveying Blackthorn Grove like a construction site. At 43, he moved with corporate confidence, his pale blue eyes calculating profit margins from dimensional anomalies. "Perimeter established, sir," reported Hayes, his security chief, whose tactical gear bristled with military-grade equipment far beyond civilian authorization. "Excellent. Begin electromagnetic containment." Sterling's tablet displayed readings that dwarfed Elena's glimpses of Kettlewell's primitive equipment. "The dimensional variance exceeds our projections." "This is perfect." Elena crouched behind the mother tree with Rowan, Vera, and Sage, watching Sterling's forces deploy with military precision. Detective Connor and her deputies had retreated after possessed scouts attacked. But Connor had witnessed enough to realize this transcended normal police procedures. "He's treating this like a mining operation," Elena whispered, horrified. "To him, that's exactly what it is," Rowan replied grimly. "Dimensional energy is just another resource to exploit." Sterling's drilling equipment positioned around the grove's perimeter, guided by technicians oblivious to the otherworldly horrors they were unleashing. Electromagnetic generators hummed to life, creating containment barriers that would actually trap everyone inside with whatever broke through. The drilling began, sending vibrations through the ground that made the mother tree pulse with distressed bioluminescence. The dimensional breach responded to mechanical interference, its edges expanding as barriers between worlds weakened. "They're destabilizing the root system," Sage said, channeling the grove's collective awareness. "Every minute increases the breach size exponentially." A convoy arrived, military vehicles and government cars belonging to agencies that didn't officially exist. Brigadier General Eleanor Krantz approached Sterling with familiar collaboration. "Department of Dimensional Security," she introduced herself. "The Pentagon is very interested in your research. Dimensional warfare represents the next evolution." Eleanor watched in horror as government agents deployed equipment designed to expand the breach rather than seal it. Massive drilling platforms surrounded the mother tree while electromagnetic amplifiers prepared to blast. Dimensional barriers into collapse. The shadow entity Sterling's team captured wasn't struggling. It was communicating with others, coordinating a mass crossing. Through the widening portal, Elena glimpsed the shadow realm, where thousands of creatures pressed against weakening barriers. "They're coming through," Sage gasped. "The breach is wide enough for mass crossing." Shadow entities poured through in overwhelming numbers, seeking human hosts among government personnel. Possessed humans began turning weapons against former colleagues, while new entities continued streaming through. Dr. Kettlewell ran toward the drilling controls with desperate purpose. "I won't let my daughter inherit a world destroyed by my cowardice." Sterling, now possessed with black eyes, lifted Kettlewell with inhuman strength. The drilling must continue. The portal must expand until dimensions merge completely. Finn the Hawk dove at possessed Sterling, creating enough distraction for Kettlewell to break free and smash the control panel. But the dimensional damage was done. "The bonding ritual is the only way," Vera gasped, chanting in ancient languages. "Someone must merge with the mother tree, becoming a bridge between dimensions." Elena approached the mother tree, understanding she would exist forever, trapped within the oak, but conscious, protecting both worlds. "Better eternal imprisonment than damnation for everyone else," Sage joined her. "I won't let you do this alone. Together, we can create something unprecedented." Their combined consciousness stabilized the dimensional barriers with extraordinary strength. The breach contracted, trapping shadow entities and freeing their human hosts. 6 weeks later, the Grove had become Earth's most unusual research facility. Elena's consciousness, distributed throughout the root network, monitored the ecosystem while maintaining communication with researchers. Gettlewell survived with dimensional sensitivity. His daughter Lucy cured by controlled exposure to healing energies. Sterling and Krantz sat in federal prison. The Groves Protection Council oversaw strict research protocols, while Elena's expanded awareness detected dimensional weak points worldwide, establishing a global guardian network. A year later, Elena oversaw monitoring stations across 3 continents. Her $3 purchase had become the seed of a global protective network where science and mysticism worked in harmony, guarding reality itself. As dusk settled over Blackthorn Grove, the mother tree pulsed with bioluminescent hope, a beacon protecting both worlds. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video,